Unit 2. Agapic notions of being, and agap. 2.1 Introduction. A lover who tries to love the beloved must face towards the beloved and concrete full attentions on the latter. This full attention draws upon all four levels of the lover's being: biological, physiological, moral, and ontological. This full attentions of the lover to the beloved calls for total devotions or dedications of the lover to the beloved, hence this total dedication is total self-giving or self-donations of the lover to the beloved. It is the self-giving of the being of the lover to the beloved. The best gifts is self-gift, that is giving if one's being to another, that is a gap. A gap is not merely giving what we have, but what we are. In this way, in this distinct form, eros and philia. In eros we give also what we desire, like to give. In philia we give in proportion to what we receive, hence in eros and philia we give what we have, but in a gap we give what we are. When we give what we are, we also give that what we have. Consequently, a gap does not exclude eros and philia, but includes and transforms them. It is because originally and fundamentally being gives itself to being, so that beings are made possible. Without being, there can't be beings. Beings are possible because beings gives itself out of itself. In this way, being by nature itself giving or love. Being is love. Since being is love, it calls for loving response on the part of beings. 2.2 Notions of being as distinct from beings. Being and such are distinct from particularized being. Particularized being is being which is studied by the diverse sciences of nature. It is the sensible and mobile beings, which are either the object of the philosophy of nature of or of the other empirical sciences. Particularized being makes and envelopes the metaphysical notions of being. The metaphysical notion of being is not disengaged from the particularized being, but is present in it in a disguised and invisible manner. All our notions and concepts are resourced in the metaphysical notions of being. It is the first of all our notions, of which all the rest are determinations. Being is determined by the difference which arises within and not outside itself. It is being which the intellect receives first and before anything else. Hence, the metaphysical intellect and this is disengage being and know it in its distinctive mystery. Being as such is real being in all the purity and fullness of its distinctive intelligibility. Or maestral objects express this being. They order it to the intellect, not to all intellects, but only to those capable of hearing it. Being seen in its distinctive properties, is trans-objectively sufficient, autonomous, and essentially diversified. When the intellect makes it first judgment in regard to being, essay, it forms its first idea. The idea of being ends by which the intellect, through simple apprehension, crosses over to judgment and lays hold of what properly belongs to judgment. The act of being as act. Being essay is the very act which turns a possible into a being. Sense essence is not the highest perfections in the order of being, but essay act of being. However, essence is an element of finite being of absolute necessity and very high nobility. as its essence is the possibility of an actual being endowed with its own finite degree of perfections. Finite being is also act and perfections. The world of finite beings is made possible by the very essences of the things which their own essence makes to be true beings. In this way, everything is called a being because of its essence. Well, everything is also called a thing on account of essence or quality as long as one keeps within the notions of the pure act of being. Essence can't be distinguished from it, but as soon as one begins to think of a being, it becomes necessary to conceive it is a participation in the pure act of being, which is the source of its dynamism. Being as dynamic, the human intellect is not a mirror that passively reflects the objects which come within its field. Rather, it is active, fundamentally oriented towards its final scope. Absolute being, the intellect is dynamic and active. It is the faculty in quest of its institutions that of assimilations with being, which is pure and simple, supremely one without limitations, without distinctions of essence and existence of impossibility and a possibility and reality trending towards the infinite. It is not fully satisfied by any finite object, however, to the extent that a finite object participates in the infinite, the intellect finds a partial goal for its appetite in the object of fancy. It categorically and makes a judgment of reality. Hence, truth is found judgment. The substantial unit of the knowing subject renders possible the conversio and the fathinsum, without which the intellect could not think of the material singular nor being about the concrete synthesis which the intellect could not think of the material singular nor being about the concrete synthesis of the judgment. Judgment is not only a synthesis but an act of affirmations too. The affirmations is the essential element of the judgment, for it makes the synthesis which have been effected into an object. It endows it with truth by relating it to the absolute being. Affirmation is an absolute objectification of the subjective form. It transforms subjective form into an ontological object. And affirmations of being which a necessity. The necessity of affirming being is identical with the very necessity of thought, since only being can become a content of thought. It follows that the necessity of thought is identical with the affirmations of being. The affirmations of being is the priori conditions of the possibility of every object in consequence, and every affirmations of the finite. The mind goes beyond the finite to the infinite. In other words, human necessarily judgment implies affirmations of being. In the affirmations of being, human experiences a movement or dynamism. The dynamism has its ultimate source in being, which is necessarily affirmed in every judgment. Human intellect is dynamic because being, which is absolute, is dynamic. In fact, that takes place a twofold movement. Human human intellect moving towards being and being moving human intellect towards itself. However, the ultimate source of this twofold movement is the absolute being without which no movement is possible. It is the objective of the pure desire to know. Pure desire to know means the dynamic originations of manifested in questions of intelligence and reflection. It is the priori and involving the drive that carries the cognitional process from sense and imaginations to understanding, from understanding to judgment, from judgment to the complete context of correct judgments, that is named knowledge. In it moves human to seek understanding, and then it prevents one from being merely content with one's own imperfect subjective personal experience. It moves human to reflect, to seek the unconditioned, and to grant unqualified assent only to the unconditioned and the unrestricted. Being as unrestricted notion at the root of all that can be affirmed or conceived is the pure desire to know. It is the pure desire which underlines all judgment and formulations, all questions, and all desire to questions, that defines its all inclusive objective. Pure desire defines being. The objective of the pure desire to know is being. It is the source not only of answers but also of their criteria, not only of questions but also of grounds on which they are questions. In other words, there is cool, detached, disinterested desire to know at the root of cognitional process, and its range is unrestricted and spontaneous. Being as spontaneous notions. There is distinction between a potentially operative notions and theoretical accounts of its of her genesis and content. The potentially operative notions is invariant. It is common to all human beings. It functions in the same manner irrespective of what theoretical account of it. It human may come to accept theoretical account of the content and genesis of the notions are numerous. They vary with philosophical context. Potentially operative notions is present invariant in all. The notions of being is such a notions present in all, and thus extends to everything that is known and unknown. It is a truth that being is unknown. Known is judgment. It is in being is known only in judgment. The notions of being is prior to judgment. For judgment presupposes reflections. Reflection presupposes questions. Questions presupposes the desire to know. Desire to know. The desire to know is the desire to know being which is immanent to self of potentially operative. It is all pervasive and underpins all cognitional contents and penetrates them all, constituting them as cognisals. All cognisals contents such as ideas and concepts and responses to the desire to know, and all judgments are responses to the demand for the unconditionals. It is the notions of the to be know thought through that content which is prior to every content. The to be known through the content passes without residue into the known through that content. As each content emerges, the notions of being also constitutes all contents. As cognitions can be known levels of knowing: experience, understanding, and judgment. Experience is the first level of knowing. It presents the matter to be known. Under, Understanding is the second level of knowing. It defines the matter to be known. Judgment is the third level of knowing, by which the experienced is through and the True is affirmed or denied, hence being is really known is judgment by which is known as being, hence knowing is knowing beings potentially as it is the core of meaning. Being as the core of meaning, the notions of being is the core of meaning as it underpins all contents, penetrates them, the constitutes them as cognitional meaning can be distinguished from the viewpoint of its sources, atoms, and the core source of meaning is an element of knowledge as such as date, image, the ideas and concepts, the graphs of the unconditioned judgment and the details and unrestricted desire to know. Acts of meaning are of three kinds: formal, full, and instrumental. The formal act of meaning is an act of conceiving, thinking, considering, defining, supposing, and formulating. The full act of meaning is an act of judging. The instrumental act of meaning is the implementation of all formal or of a full act by way of words or symbols in a spoken, written, or merely imagined utterance. The all-inclusive terms of meaning is being, since apart from being there is nothing in this way. The core of all acts of meaning is the intentions of being. A given judgment pertains to a context of judgment. It is from the context that the meaning of the given judgment is determined. For the meaning of the judgment is an element in the determinations of the universal intentions of being, which is the act of existence. Being as the act of existence. Being is grasped only as the act of existence of entity. Being is at once separate, be united to a respective subject that is distinct from it. In other words, in the pre-apprehensions, be grasps being only through the concept of a specific, sensibly presented and particular entity. In the same way, every entity is appended in the pre-apprehensions of the unlimited scope of all the possible objects of thought. This means the entity is apprehended at a moment when it finds itself with the totality of its possible objects. This totality is the one original ground of determinations of the possible objects of being, which are the manifestations of being. Being manifests being. When being is conceived is the manner of one object, and the world in the manner of an appearance. Being in general and all that is immaterial is conceived in the manner of material beings. This is to say, it is considered as a being which has being one can't conceive a thing existing in itself in any other way. Hence, the origin of all human concept is through the senses. Even non-material being can't be comprehended by human apart from reference to an appearance through which this non-material being becomes a datum. Hence, being both in direct knowledge and in metaphysical reflections can be grasped only through beings manifested by being. Even transcendental reflections on being is affected necessarily through beings in appearance of manifestations. Human finds being in general open to it in the pre-apprehensions that goes beyond the appearance. Being the general is disclosed to the human spirit as an objective grasping of appearance in the pre-apprehensions. The most general structures of being are simultaneously. No being is being present to itself, being is knowing, or luminosity. Being is itself affirmations to build the bill and the good. Therefore being in general is disclosed to human in the appearance of manifestations to beings in suffer, as these most general definitions of being in general are known through beings through questions. Being as the absolute fact of quotients. Human quotients is something final, incredible. Every attempt to place the quotients in quotients, that is quotients the quotients, it itself again raising a quotient. So human is bound to quotients, hence it is the absolute fact which refuses to be replaced by another fact. This quotient is a metaphysical quotient. The metaphysical quotient is the reflexive articulations of the questions about being, which pervade as the ground of human existence itself. It turns upon itself as such, and thereby turns upon the presuppositions of the questions of the transcendental questions. Does not merely place something asked about in questions, but also the one questioning and the questions itself. Thus being is the end of questions itself. Being as the end of human questions. When we ask questions, when we not only known how things are in relations to us, but also how they are absolutely in themselves, what it is in itself. In this way the conditions absolute being puts an end the human questions. The very act of questioning reveals that even if we only explicitly inquire about the relative validity for us personally, the relative validity itself is posited as absolute. Behind the relative horizon there is always an absolute horizon. Validity for me can be spoken of only because we contrast it with validity in itself. The horizon of our questioning is the unconditioned. The unconditioned is expressed in the word I as being. Here being is the unconditioned of all questioning. It is absolutely necessary. It is always unnecessarily presupposes and the conditions of the every questions. It is affirmed in the very act of questions without any limit. Being as the unlimited, the horizon of our knowing is limited. That our knowledge can't be absolute in a limited horizon. We can't ask about the ultimate absolute or conditions or point of view. Hence, the horizon must be unlimited to the penetrated into the intensively detached core of being. We must reach the extensively the widest range of being, that which constitutes the ultimate unconditioned reality of things is being, and that which affects absolutely everything without any limitations is also being. Therefore being is the ultimate reality of both intensively and extensively. The horizons of being within which we ask the questions as questions is unlimited, as it is a knowing and not knowing at the same time. Being as knowing and not knowing, every question implies that we know about the being, for we can't question about something of which we do not know anything at all. However, the questions also presupposes that we do not know about being. In this way, questions manifest both our identity of being and knowing and the distinction between them. In other words, our knowledge about being consists in the identity of being and knowing, and our not knowing about being consists in the non-identity of being and knowing. Thus being is the principles of all beings, being as the principle of beings. One may ask two basic questions about everything: whether it is and what it is. The first question is about the things act is being. The second is about its essence. Should something possess only an essence without the act of being, then that would not be real being, but merely possible. The real affairs from the possible as the act of being is added to its essence. Hence the act of being is that in the entirety which makes it real. It distinguishes the entirety from a merely possible thing. It is the inner principle of, or ground of that which really is. It is the inner ground truth which beings are in themselves. It is that through which every entity is real. The whatness of each entity receives its reality from the act of being. Of the same reality, the act of being makes real whatever is real, including all the determinations of the entities, including its whatness. Being is the universal ground or principle of all entities and of their determinations. 2.3 Being as a gap love. Being comes from being. If beings come from being, how do they come from being? Why should they come from being? Why should there be beings rather than nothing? It is clear fact of experience that we are beings, and what we encounter are all beings. One reasonable explanation for the presence of beings is that they all come from being, or they are on own. They can't be their on their own power because they are finite or limited. Hence, there must be there because of being, which is by its own power. If being is there totally on its own power, it must be all powerful. If it is all powerful, it must be unlimited. If it is unlimited, it must be infinite. If it is infinite, it must be eternal. If it is eternal, it must be the ultimate. If it is ultimate, if it must be the unconditioned and conditions of all other conditions. Hence, being which is the all-powerful, infinite, eternal, ultimate, and unconditioned is the principles of all finite beings. Since all finite beings come from being, the finitude of the finite beings must also come from being that is infinite. The finite beings must be limited by being only, since there is nothing outside to the domain of being. If it is so, the then is being finite. The question is contradictory because the infinite can't be infinite, although the infinite can't be finite. Infinite can allow itself to be limited, so that finite beings are possible. In this way, that takes place always. The ontological incarnations by which the infinite on its own freely always itself to place always. Ontological incarnations by which the infinite on its own freely allows itself to be limited in the finite. For the sake of the finite, the infinite being is infinitely free to give itself to the finite, so that finite can respond itself in freedom. In other words, being gives itself so that finite can be. The finite beings are the instances of the self-giving of the infinite being. The self-giving of the infinite completely for the sake of the finite is agepic in nature. That is, being by its very nature is self-giving or as agepic. Love, thus being is agapic of or love. Ontology by its very nature is agapic ontology. One could be justified in saying I love, therefore I am. If being is self-giving or IJPic, then every being is expected to give itself back to being in freedom. There can be no genuine love without freedom. Freedom as conditions of love. A determinist is one who denies human freedom. The determinist reason that every human action is a definite determined act, since the act of choice is determined. It is caused and hence not free. According to them, an act is an unavoidable response to a stimulus. The true cause of our actions may not always be clear to us. It may be hidden from our consequences. What we normally call choices. It firmly controlled by factors that it lie beyond the individual's control. If the controlling factor is physical, then the determinism is in the hereditary or genetic, which means that through certain inherited characteristics, one is led to the choose and to choose in unletterably the way on does. If the controlling factor is one's past patterns of behavior and one's fundamental mindset, then the determinism is physiological. If the controlling factor is one's cultural and educational background, then the determinism is environmental. Finally, the determinism is theological. If the controlling factor is attributed to the divine will or heavenly bodies. Free will is the ability of the will or conditions for actions being present to decide whether to act of not to act and whether to act in this manner or in that manner. Freedom in the widest sense is absence of external coercion of force. In the narrow sense, it is the absence of intrinsic necessity or determinations in the performance of an act. Intrinsically necessary means that which is determined by its very nature to be what is the end and to act as it does. The will is free from intrinsic necessity or determinations in at least some of its acts. That is, will is capable of choice when all the conditions for acting are present. It does not mean that will is free in every respect. For instance, it is governed by intrinsic necessity of determinations in seeking happiness. Besides, the will acts impulsively and deliberately in many circumstances. The advocates of free will also admit that certain states and mental conditions make it impossible for the will to exercise its freedom, such as sleep, absent-mindedness, delirium, hyponesis, insanity, etc. Bissell considered for argument justifying freedom the argument from common consent, the physiological argument, the ethical argument, and the philosophical argument. Argument from common consent. The great majority of humans believe that their will is free. This conversation is of the utmost practical importance for the whole of human life. Therefore, if there is order in the world, the majority of humankind can't be wrong in this belief. Hence, the bill is free. Physiological argument. We have said that most people naturally hold that the bill is free. Why do they cling to that conviction? That is because they are directly and indirectly aware of the freedom of their own decisions. They are directly aware of their freedom in the very act of making a free decisions. They are indirectly aware of it because of the many instances of behavior which can only be explained by admitting the freedom of all of the will. Ethical argument. If there is no freedom, there is no real responsibility, no virtue, no merit, no moral obligations, no duty, and no morality. The necessary connections between freedom and those spiritual realities is quite obvious and is demonstrated in ethics. This is the strong argument because the senses of duty and the belief in morality and moral obligations come naturally to home, and even those who deny their existence in Theory live in practice as if they admitted it. Kant, who claimed that the existence of freedom was not demonstrable by theoretical reason, nevertheless was convinced that human is free, and he derived these convictions from the act of duty which he considered to be immediately evident to the practical reason. Philosophical argument: every kind of knowledge invokes a corresponding kind of striving. As my knowledge is always knowledge of after something is knowledge, my mind freely tends strives towards the object of my knowledge. This this follows from the fact that knowledge and striving are the two fundamental immaterial functions or aspects of a rational being. In other words, there is in human immaterial kind of knowledge, hence there must also be in human and immaterial kind of striving. Immaterial striving is intrinsically independent of matter, which is one of the principles principles of limitations or restrictions of a material finite being. The other being an infinite principles, namely the absolute being. And since immaterial striving in its is independent or free of matter, this is in human a free principle, which is the principle of free striving, that is free will, which is relatively free but not absolutely free, as it is not free of the absolute being. Philosophy speaking, freedom is also an analogous concept predicated in different ways of different types of various forms of attributions indicate a formal relations which remains the same. These relations can be put negatively or positively. Negatively, freedom means being free from, that is, relations of not being bound, of being independent from something. This negative concept is also a relative one, since every finite being is related to other beings in the world. It may be free from direct relationships to this or that, but not from all things. Beings, for instance, which are free from insertions into civilizations and history, are all the more fully involved in nature and the universe. Of being fully free in the negative sense could not be being in the world. A fully isolated being without any relationship would be based on nothing, and be nothing. Negation is always based on something positive. If negative freedom was conceived as an absolute, such a fully indeterminate being would be without a world and reduced to nothingness. In contrast to the negative and relative concepts, there is a positive and absolute concept of freedom. A being is positively free insofar as it is in possession of itself with the sufficient conditions for all its being and relations. Hence, freedom means self-possession of being completely present to it or oneself. Self-positions is the essence of presence. To person is in possession of oneself and is not possessed by another. When we look at the freedom in this way, human freedom is neither merely negative and relative nor fully positive and absolute. Of course, human has some dominion over oneself and so also over parts of the world, but one is at the same time inserted into the world and dependent on the beings among which one finds oneself. Thus, human freedom is constituted by isolations and power and being free from and being free to. This basic mode of human freedom may be called a transcendental freedom, which is the fundamental property of human, by which human alone can say is human can contract all things with oneself as beings and so comprehend them in being in this way humans was has capacity of distancing all things from oneself and oneself from all things. And even from oneself this universal freedom of distancing its transcendence being over and beyond every individual being. Thus freedom is the foundations of human self-transcendence. This capacity for self-transcendence is the basis of agapic or self-giving love. If a being does not give itself to being and beings, then it goes against its very nature as being. Agapic love in classical Greek, especially in Plato's Symposium, there are two terms for love. These are eros and philia. Eros is based on strong feelings. बुला रहे हो आपको बुला रहे हैं कौन वहाँ पे वॉचमैन थोड़े नहाए मैम बोले हेलो is it there available? Yes, yes. No, I'll pick it from the nearby. Sorry? I'll pick it from the nearby. Nearby? Nearby. Yes, have this, right? You don't have a lift for this? Yeah, we have lift. Two lift. You can, the watchman guided the steps to this. Which type of place are you prefer, sir? No, remember a 45 minutes spa. 45 minutes spa? Like which nearby. Nearby, man. If you can give the same price, I can just pay it you. I don't mind anything. If you want me to take from here, I'll take orange. If you want me to pay the cash, I'll pay cash. It's 27.99. So that is for this color. Massage. It's 19.99. Sorry? It's 19.99. 45 minutes. Just your timing. Okay, fine. Okay, so it's 23.90. This one, 23. 23.99. Yeah. Marconto. Want to buy a coupon here? No, just group check कर Marconto.
Cash.
And what is the amount for 60 minutes?
Sorry, 60 minutes 3,000.
I go for the 60. Else, 45 was the value should be over by 8.
45 minutes.
Yeah. 24 hours.
Just right.
Just like this and then
Signature. Coming, more control. Angel. बोलो मैडम में कुछ अपडेट नहीं है ना।
फोन करना मैंने बोली थी मैं
फोन कर रहा हूँ, फोन ही नहीं उठा रहा है। बाहर गए ना वो। कल करो ना फिर, कल आ जाएंगे।
नहीं आ रहा है कौन गुरुवार उपास होता है यार इसलिए हम
फ्राइडे को लेना फिर।
हाँ
फ्राइडे को
मैंने बोली थी मेरे
लेकिन
अभी भी कोई
मेरे को कुछ अपडेट नहीं किया ना। मैं
बोल
कैसे
के गई हूँ बोली
हाँ लेकिन मैं बोल रहा हूँ ना कि मेरे को बोला नहीं, कुछ अपडेट नहीं किया है। मेरे को अपडेट करते मैं क्यों नहीं देता था।
I'll come from Washington.
For 45 minutes L Swedish Marcondo 45 मेरे को अपडेट करते मैं क्यों नहीं कर देता। अभी मैं फोन कर रहा हूँ कस्टमर के लिए।
मेरे को बोली हो यार
हाँ लेकिन ये देखो मैं तो तुम्हारा खुद सामने मैंने फोन किया है, फोन ही नहीं उठा रहे। पता तो मैं क्यों नहीं तुमको बोल देता। ये देखो मैंने अभी जस्ट फोन किया था 7:05 को मैंने फोन किया, फोन ही नहीं अटेंड कर रहा। बाहर है ना आप लोग।
बोलते मैं नहीं रही तो शाहरुख को बोल दिया मैं इतनी भी बोली मेरे
लेकिन मेरे को बोलना नहीं भाई, कुछ भूल गया होगा। तब तक रुको ना, जब तक मेरा फोन किया है, फोन बैक नहीं है। जैसे तुम रिटर्न आएगा तो मैं वो भी पूछ लूंगा, गवर्नमेंट के हाथ में भेजवा दूंगा। ठीक है।
In classical Greek expression Plato's Symposium, there are two terms for love. There are eros and philia. Eros is based on strong feelings toward another. It usually occurs in the first stage of man.
हेलो, गुड इवनिंग स्पा। यस सर। सॉरी, ये होटल नोटिस के सामने है मेरे बंदे।
Of man-woman relationship, it is based more on physical traits. For example, when a man says he has fallen in love with a woman because she looks like an angel, or when a woman falls in love with a man because he is intelligent and he has good breeding, etc., it is based more on self-benefit, on what can benefit oneself rather than the other person. When one person does not feel happy anymore in loving the other person, he is led to believe that she has fallen out of love. Philia, as we mentioned earlier, is love based on friendship between two persons. Undoubtedly, friendship is the foundation of a successful relationship. This is true whether it is marriage relationship, between family members, relationship with a co-workers, one employer, etc. This is in contrast to a man-woman romantic relationship, which starts out by runs with heroes. One sees only each other's strengths, good side, everything is rosy. Philia is based on Give and take, where two people enrich each other in a mutual relationship. One partner is still concerned with that he can take, but at the same time is also concerned with the his partner benefit and therefore gives back in return. It is higher type of love than eros. Philia is a mutual give and take relationship, will eros is a self-based form of love that is more concerned with self-benefit. There is also a third Greek term, ag- agap, which occurs rather infrequently in Greek usage. Of course, the verb agapao, to love, was common in classical Greek and occurred in the Septuagint. Alexis borrowed from the popular Egyptian dialect. It is love above philia and eros. It is a love that is totally selfless, where a person gives out love to another person, even if this act does not benefit her or him in any way, whether the love given is returned or not. The person continues to love even without any self benefit. Say for instance, one helps another person even though that person hates he her him or one takes insults from one's partner without hitting back, all the while forgiving and praying for the partner to amend his ways. Ajapic love as love for peace. Indian ontology, through the term ontology, is sim- symptomatically Western, denotes of ontological speculations of prominent Indian thinkers, ancient or modern Hindus or non-Hindus, theist or atheist, even in the ancient writings of the orthodox Hindu philosophers like the Sarva Darsana Samgraha of Madhyavakarya, which tries to present in one place the views of all Sarva schools of philosophy. We find the views of atheists, and materialists like the Caravakas, and orthodox thinkers like the Buddhas and the Jains, along with those of the orthodox Hindu thinkers. Indian ontology is marked in this respect by a striking breadth of agepic inclusiveness, other-centered outlook, with which only testifies its unflinching devotion and love to the other in its search for truth. Through there were many different schools with various views. Each school took care to learn the views of all the others and did not come to any conclusion before considering thoroughly what others had to say. This agepic spirit led to the formations of a method of ontological discussion. A thinker had to first state the views of one's opponents before the formulated one's own theory. The statement of the opponent's view came to be known as the prior view. Purva Paksha then followed the refutations, khandana of this view. Last of all came the statement of the philosopher's own positions, which therefore was known as the subsequent view, Uttar Prakasa of the conclusion Siddhanta. कौन सा रूम रेडी करना है?
तो थोड़ा
नहीं, रूम खोलो ना.
मैं करता हूँ.
This agepic commitment to the knowledge of reality, of giving oneself to the knowledge of rival positions with humility and concern, was more than rewarded by perfections that each philosophical school attained. If we open a comprehensive work on the Vedanta, we will find in the statement of the views of all other schools, Karavaka, Buddha, Jaina, Sankhya, Yoga, Mimamsa, Nyaya and Vaisesika discussed and weighed with all care. Similarly, any good work on the Buddha or Jaina philosophy discusses the other views with an agepic openness. If the agepic openness of mind, the willingness to listen to what others say, has been one of the chief causes of the greatness of Indian philosophy in the past, it has also a definite moral for the chief causes of the greatness of Indian philosophy in the past. It has also a definite moral for the future, especially for the Indian Christian philosophizing. If India philosophy is once more to revive. Revive up continue its honored march. If the Indian Christian philosophizing is to be relevant in today's context, if the Association of Christian Philosophers of India is to be of significance to the the thinkers of this country, it can do so only by taking into considerations the new ideas of being, reality and life which make originate from a vast multitude of peoples, the blacks, the whites, the Dravidians, the Aryans, the Semitics, the Mongolians, the Dalits, the tribals, the scientists and technologists from all religions of the world and their problems, and only by being aged begin this way, as we go through the history of Indian ontology we find Indians. So please sit.
Thank you.
We find Indians ontology. Despite several diametrically opposed doctrines to be an outstanding ontology of unity in diversity, rooted in an agepic openness, our fellow citizens passing through the inevitable process of struggles and cooperations have been third. Okay.
क्या हो रहा है?
मैं check करूँ.
नहीं
I just saw. You don't open the door. I just see.
no
Just see.
no
Just check the room first.
no पूरा रूम बिजी है लॉक नहीं कर सकते
B2B. सुनो तो सारा रूम बिजी है. सारा रूम बिजी है.
हाँ तुझे ना बाहर में हूँ
तो बोलती हूँ. One of the most practical aspects of features of Indian ontology of agepic and thus as an ontology of love and peace influenced by the Indian concept of peace, not only the Greeks and the Chinese but many others who reached the Indian soil. They stayed here for months and years and went back to their respective countries with the eternal message of agepic love and peace. सारे रूम बिजी है.
ये ना फिर एक सामान लेना जिसे सामान